Okay, now we're going to go over some key mistakes that we see often and some ways of correcting those key mistakes. The first one is the arm swing person, the person that does not understand force production with the legs and tends to over-dominate the kettlebell with their arms. So we're going to look at that first. One thing right out of the gate you can often do when someone has too much arms in the kettlebell swing and they can't seem to get their arms out of it and use their legs accordingly is to give them a slightly heavier bell. Sometimes a heavier bell is too heavy for them to utilize their arms. They have no choice but to figure out how to utilize their hips and legs and get that sequence going. So sometimes, we give people a light bell initially because they don't know what they're doing and we're trying to teach them. And that can actually sometimes be counterproductive also because they just tend to over-clench it with their arms and muscle with their arms. So a little bit heavier bell. The right bell typically for a beginner is really a medium bell. Not too light, certainly not heavy. A medium bell so that they don't over-dominate with their arms. So what we're going to do here is demonstrate what's called a low swing. One thing we can also do is teach people how to swing the bell low. Just take the arms out. Get them to stop focusing so much on the height of the bell. People tend to focus on, because they see people swing, that the bell needs to get up here somewhere at 90 degrees, and it doesn't. Especially when you're just trying to learn how to sequence the production of force with the hips and the glutes and the quads. So a low swing is perfectly acceptable, where you just let the bell finish low. There's no focus on height at all. You just let the arms kind of flop right out in front while you still learn to snap it out with your glutes and your quads. So Christine's going to demonstrate about 6, 7, 8 low swings. Go ahead, Christine. Notice that everything's the same. The hip and glute and quad contractions the same. The bell just finishes much lower. She doesn't even let the bell, she can even go a little lower than that if you wanted to. Just keep it down low and just learn to snap. Learn to snap. When the person doesn't have to focus on the bell height anymore and just do a low swing, then we're going to do 2 normal swings, Christine, when the bell really pops up hard. Then they can start learning to get that same sequence and apply it to more projection of energy on the bell. Thank you. And then I'm just going to demonstrate what an arm tug kind of looks like when people are tugging with the arms too much. You just step over to my place or that place. So sometimes we get this here on the arm swing. You pull with the arms, they won't finish with the hips, get a lot of this, a lot of yanking back on the bell, not seeing enough extension of the hips and knees. It's really swung with the arms a lot like that. Nothing really happening down here. And the low swing Christine just did can oftentimes really correct that and teach them that just by letting the arms stay low and just work the snap. Work the snap. And even the hinge riggers, just work on getting the hips and knees to snap. The focus isn't on the hinge even, it's on that powerful lockout. That's the key. We're looking for that lockout. Okay, next correction that we're going to talk about and look at is people that have these sequencing problems where they tend to get the arms way out in front, or on the backswing in particular, they tend to start the hips way early and then the bell drops too low. A good correction just for general sequencing problems is the towel swing. Now I want to emphasize that this is not an exercise. This is not something you do to get exercise and to train people. This is a drill you use to coach them into better technique. The towel swing is simply a drill. As soon as they don't have to do the towel swing anymore because they got their sequencing right, you want to go back to regular swings. The towel swing is not for exercise purposes. Again, it's just a drill, just a corrective, so to speak, for the skill and technique of the kettlebell swing. So we take a towel, we loop it through there, we roll it up a little bit like that, and typically one a little smaller towel than we have also. We don't need this much towel hanging out behind there. But we want to make sure we grip the thing, we grip the towel as close to the kettlebell handle as possible. So there's very little slack, almost no slack between your hand and the handle. We want to make sure that the towel, you grip it all the way up to the handle. That's very important, very key to the success of this drill being done well. And then all we're going to do is Christine's going to do about 5, 6 good towel swings and demonstrate what it needs to look like. Okay, go ahead and do that. If her sequence is not right, the kettlebell will flop around and disconnect, and it'll tell you, it gives you instant feedback as to the bell dropping and moving all over the place on the end. And do one more. So if your sequence isn't good, it'll look something like this. I'll demonstrate poor technique. So when the sequence isn't right, I get the arms out in front, or I bend them too much, the bell just starts to jump away from me like that. Or if I start my hips down too soon, it starts to really jump away from the towel, and you get instant feedback, like, ugh, that doesn't feel good. The bell's not connected to me. When you get your sequence right though, even low and easy, all of a sudden the bell flows real nice on the end of the towel, both behind me and in front of me. So I'm going to have Christine demonstrate it one more time at full speed, and notice how the bell stays very connected to her because her sequence is right. Because she propels the bell with her hips and quads forward, she stabilizes well, she lets the bell finish. She doesn't get in a hurry. The bell will stay attached to the towel. Coming down, if she does her sequence right, the bell will stay attached to the towel, because she will drop that first, push it back under her, and then go into her hip hinge. Go ahead. And you'll see the bell sit on the end. This can really correct and teach proper kinetic linking and sequencing for people that really lack it. It's really good feedback instantly to is my sequence correct or not correct. And there we go, that's the towel swing. Okay, another common problem mistake we see is that people just don't put enough quadricep and glute contraction to produce enough force to really move the bell with any kind of sense of urgency or authority, and therefore they lack power, overall power output. So we're going to do a drill, a technique called the ISO deadlift, or the ISO lockout, also known as the static stomp deadlift in the Russian kettlebell world. And what this is going to do is just help to teach the person how to feel what it's like to really contract hard the quadriceps, the glutes, the abdominals, the key muscles they need to contract to be able to produce high levels of force, transfer high levels of force, and really have a crisp, sharp, powerful kettlebell swing. So, Christine's going to demonstrate kind of a typical low-tension kettlebell swing we see. The technique will look correct, but you just won't have a lot of power in it. And that's what we're going to see right now. So it's good technique, but not a ton of power. Now she's finishing her hips and knees, the sequence is right, there's not a lot of power in it. There's not a lot of hip extension, there's not a lot of energy in the quads, not a lot of tension in the stomach. We see people who swing soft like this a lot, and they go ahead and relax. What we really want to do is take that mass and accelerate it to maximize our power output, which means we need to contract the quads and glutes with a lot more force, a lot more assertion than that. So now we're going to do the ISO deadlift. So I'm going to back the bell up under her. She's going to go down and do her hip hinge. Take her position. She's going to stand up and do a good lockout deadlift. She's going to lock out and squeeze the glutes. She's going to lock out and squeeze the quadriceps. She's a good deadlift. She's going to purposefully, and the person typically won't put a lot of tension in this at first. So we're going to teach them where they need to have tension by palpating and creating some facilitation by touching, punching, banging. Just touch the area and get them to tighten. Feel the tension here. Do you feel the tension? I should say this to them. Do you feel the tension in the glutes? Make sure they're comfortable with you touching the glutes. But then you just want to hit them and make sure they're contracting it. Most of the time, what they'll notice once you touch it is the area that you touch, oh, they're not really squeezing that area. They'll go, oh, now I feel what you mean. Now I feel the contraction. Now I feel my quads tighten under your hands. Now I feel my glutes tighten. Now, when I hit, now I feel the abdomen tighten. I'm like, this is the tension. When you're coaching this, you say, this is the tension. Feel how hard it is, how much tension it takes? They're going to be like, yeah, this is really taking a lot of energy. Correct, because you're contracting your muscle with a lot more force. Abdomen, quads, and glutes at the same time. And you get them to understand what it feels like to really contract those areas hard at the same time for about 20 seconds. Go ahead and deadlift it down. Then you ask them to just relax the muscles for a minute. Shake the muscles out a little bit because it is contracting them very hard. And relax them. Shake the glutes a little bit because it is contracting them very hard. Then you say to the person, you're going to step back and try to create that exact same feeling. That feeling you just had in your quads, that feeling you just had in your glutes and stomach, you're going to step back and do that exact feeling in every swing. And what you'll notice without fail every time is the person suddenly has a much more crisp swing, the quads, glutes, and abdomen fire much harder. And you may have to do a little cueing to remind them of that as they do the swing, but suddenly the swing will have that crispness, and now once they understand what it feels like to do that, it'll hold and stay much more. So now Christine's going to demonstrate the more tension-oriented swing we're looking for a power production standpoint. So you're going to Christine, if she's my client, I'm going to tell her, you're going to make sure you contract your quads, your glutes, and your stomach just as hard as you just did a second ago when you were doing the isometric hold. Okay? Same feeling. Here we go. And I'll coach her and cue her. Hey, remember, quads. Remember, glutes just as tight. Stomach just as tight. Make it all tight just as hard every time. Do 3 more. Get the same feeling you did in the isometric deadlift. Stomach, quads, glutes. All right, another common problem we see is the person will tend to go into the backswing. Go ahead and do the backswing. They'll tend to swing down, and every time they swing down, they'll punch over. And it's like we just cannot get them out of the spinal flexion. Every time they stand up, they look pretty good at the top, they go down, and we get hunch. And they come up, and they look good, and they go down, and they get punching in. And we're like, why can't we get them out of this position? So here's some good corrections to get people out of that position. Now, the first one is typically, people like to look at the bell, which is fine, but as the bell drops, they tend to take their head and look at it. And if the head looks down first, if you glance down first or look down, that immediately facilitates the curling flexion pattern in the body, and they will go right into a hunch if they look down. So This is where some people can't do the neck packing very well and the neutral neck position very well because it'll facilitate this curl. So if they tend to have a flexion pattern in their body, they need to stand up and actually keep their eyes on the horizon where the ground meets the wall. That's where they need to look. So if the bell drops, they're not looking at the bell anymore. They look at the horizon and then continue to look at the horizon. That oftentimes will fix the thoracic hunch or the lumbar hunch. Especially if there's someone that you screened or assessed and you know they got the hamstring and they got the hinging ability to get here, but when they swing they just don't. Oftentimes look up at their head. They might be throwing their head down first and flexing, and that's causing the thoracic flexion. A lot of times people get caught up in the conversation about, go ahead and stand up again, and the conversation about make sure you fire the lats, make sure you fire your thoracic area. If someone's in the middle of a swing, they can't overthink about firing their lats or thoracic area. That will compartmentalize them and kind of throw off the sequence of the swing, especially when they're a beginner and they're just learning. We don't want to give them too many just isolated details. We want to get the feel and the rhythm and the sequence for it and build the details on top of that later. Framework first, then put all the nice little details on. So we get too caught up in when they start to flex over, no, you got to squeeze here, you got to pull back through your lats. And we start talking about that. That oftentimes won't fix it, or that'll fix that but mess something else up. So typically it's the eyes, and they're curling their head too soon, trying to look at the bell or look down for whatever reason. It's something down their body. They're maybe like, oh, my abs are supposed to be tight, so they look at their abs, and that flexes them over as they go down. So just one way to get out of it is get their eyes to stay up. That'll oftentimes take care of it. So again, going back into why else we might flex through the thoracic and lumbar spine too much in the backswing, go ahead and take that backswing position properly. So she has proper position here, but oftentimes again we'll see people flexing and the head will be in the right position or the eyes will be up and they're still getting too much flexion as they come under. So we have to look somewhere else. And we're talking about get your thoracic tight, get your lats tight, get your shoulders back. We've probably gone over that 100 times. We stand them up. We see that they can do it. We even see that they can do it at the bottom, but during the swing they keep losing it. Why? And how else can we correct that? Well, here's what usually is happening that I found. Go ahead and face forward for me, Christine. Typically, what forces the arms into that curl is when they go to take the bell underneath their hips, their knees caving in will force the arms in and force the shoulders to curl. So you see how our knees are caving in? That's going to, no matter what, you cannot get out of a thoracic flex. When your arms are curled in like that, when your knees are curled in like that, it forces your arms in, you're going to have to flex. It's going to definitely reduce your ability to extend. You need to open the knees up or spread the walls with your thighs. So one big cue we want to use is spread the walls with the inner thighs. When I push against here, spread against my hands. Push as hard against my hands as you can. Don't let me cave them in. And that will oftentimes allow them to have more space, more room to put their arms up against their body. Turn back to the side. So she'll be doing that. Spread the wall. Go ahead and hinge back. She's purposely spreading here so the knees track the feet better. She's getting more glute activation, specifically the glute medius, some of the hip rotators to stop the knees from caving in. And that's giving her more space to throw the belt under the hips and load the upper body properly, or position the upper body properly. Now she can fire her lats better and get her thoracic spine in better position. Go ahead and stand up. So sometimes it's not as simple as looking at the problem that we're seeing right here. When the position's not right, you got to look somewhere else. That might be what's causing that position. Oftentimes, knees caving in causes the flexion to occur. So if we can just get them to facilitate spread with the cue of spread the walls with the thighs, that allows them to have the space to throw the hips under. And she's just going to demonstrate from the front a couple of swings facing you guys so that you can see that position of the knees out. Versus in. So here it is. We'll go with correctly. Knees will be out over the feet. You'll notice that as she throws the bell back underneath, go ahead and just keep swinging. That every time she throws it down, the knees push out. She spreads the floor. She's allowed to get into a much better position and hinge a lot better and keep the thoracic in a much better position. And relax. Now just watch a couple here. Purposely force your knees in against the arms. And just watch a couple from the front. You'll notice right out of the gate, the alignment doesn't look good. But sometimes we forget to look from the front. Because we're so busy looking at the angles and positions from the side that we don't look from the front. We can't see what's going on from the front. Sometimes you got to look from the front, but then swing from the front. Every time she does a back swing, those knees come in this time. And it's going to be even that little bit of coming in. Just that. It's like, oh, that doesn't look so bad. If they come in that much, they push your arms in, they're going to cause her to have a lot less access to the hips. Not enough room, so they rest. And that's going to cause her to try to get there another way, typically by flexing through the spine, where we don't want that. Okay, and one final typical mistake we see is people really lack the ability to even access hip extension And oftentimes, we try to put people into a situation to learn the kettlebell swing where you need great glute activation and great hip extension accessibility, and people don't have it, so they end up swinging really without using their glutes because they just don't have the ability to get their hips there into extension or even activate those glutes correctly. So I'm just going to have Christine demonstrate a swing where the glutes really aren't in there. You'll see a lot more spinal extension. You'll see the butt kind of staying behind. And then we'll talk about what we do to correct that almost instantaneously, or at least start the process of improving it almost instantaneously. All right, Christine, a few swings without hip extension. Leave the ass out. That's it. There is no glutes really at all. You'll see full extension here to the hips. The hips are kind of staying in the flex position, okay? And relax. Very hard for her to make this look bad, by the way. So now what we're going to do is try to basically, the hip flexors, if the hip flexors are tight, you won't be able to get into hip extension. So we got to kind of release. Pavel talks about releasing the brakes by basically taking the hip flexors and releasing them so that your gas pedal, your engine, can really, really drive forward. So we're going to release the brakes by simply stretching the hip flexors to allow for more potential accessibility into hip extension and potentially more glute activation. Notice I said potential because you still won't know how to use your glutes or access that end range hip extension if you've never been there. You'll just now have the potential for it by getting rid of some of that hip flexor tightness. Okay? So Christine's going to drop down on one knee right here and demonstrate the hip flexor mobilization or stretch that we do. Hop down on the right knee. She's going to point the toe behind her in the back here, flat on the ground for me. We're going to align the foot with the knee with the hip, make sure the hips are square straight ahead. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the technique of this here, because we're talking about the swing, but just understand that the pelvis and ribcage should stack up, the glutes should tighten, and then she's going to drive forward into hip extension. This is going to stretch the TFL, the psoas, the iliacus, the rectus a little bit, and give her more accessibility into hip extension. She's going to learn to squeeze the glute and push through that, okay? And just so you can see the ribcage position, she'll lift the arms up a little bit, keep the stomach back in there a little bit, stack up really good right here. That's a good hip flexor stretch, okay? And then, to integrate that new range of motion, we're going to have her lay flat on her back, and then use that range of motion and learn how to use the glutes to produce the hip extension. She'll bend both knees and do just our standard, go ahead and put the arms up there, standard glute bridge where we emphasize not lifting up through the spine, but lifting up through the hips. And she'll now use that hip extension she just built in the hip flexor stretch by firing her glute and trying to drive her hips all the way up into extension, as opposed to go ahead and relax your glutes and now spinal extend instead. This is what she was doing before when she was swinging. The pelvis was down, the spine was in that big arch, the glutes were relatively loose and not contracting and come back down. Instead, she's going to emphasize what we just did with the hip flexor stretch, which is to tilt the pelvis through and drive up and through with her hips and glutes, maintaining a nice, stable, aligned ribcage and pelvis. This is exactly the way it should look when she locks out the kettlebell swing. So she'll come down and now try to associate that feeling and that position to the kettlebell swing. So we first release the hip flexors to give us more potential to access hip extension. We then integrate it with the glute bridge to feel what hip extension really should feel like and to correct it and teach it, and then come up here and integrate that new feeling into the actual movement pattern that we originally were trying to attain in the first place, which is a good swing using good hip extension. So now Christine come up, and she's going to hop in front of that bell, and now with new potential, the brakes off, potential to drive through hip extension, better activated glutes from the glute bridge, she's going to put that into the swing. And it might take a second to integrate it. So you might be like, whoa, I got a little bit looser hip. I can push forward more. I can squeeze my glutes more. And then you'll get the feel for that and start using what they just did. And you can use these three exercises together to help build a better pattern of hip extension in the swing. And rest. Good job.